Well, there's a small part of the Tesla business, a very small part that might only be in the, I don't know, tens of billions of dollars of revenue, or maybe, who knows, in the tens of billion dollars of profits coming in the future. That is the supercharger network and all those charging stations out there. I've got Cern Basher here this morning, who, as usual, will have lots of charts, slides, numbers, good stuff for us to look at to see exactly what is going on with this business. Cern, there's a bunch of news out this morning. We've picked the perfect day to record this. It'll be out tomorrow. But talk to me about some of the news we heard.
Well, as always, Randy, our timing is perfect. Is perfect. Yeah, we must have anticipated the this news development. But so among other things, Tesla announced today that they're opening one new supercharging stall every hour in North America. And was that something like 8 or 9,000 stalls per
Close to
year?
9,000 a year if they continue that rate. Yes.
Yeah, and so that's a pretty high rate of growth for North America. And that makes sense because I believe today is also the day that they are opening up the superchargers to Rivian, General Motors, Volvo, and Polestar.
And Ford.
So,
And Ford.
and Ford, sorry, yes, Ford. And so, we may expect an influx of vehicles using supercharging stations.
I would certainly think so. Anything to get away from those other brands. The other charging stations, not so good. Yeah, so very, very interesting. So we have that to talk about and more. I understand you've got a slide deck, as usual, filled with interesting pictures for us to look at. So go ahead and share your screen if you want.
That sounds great. I do have some pretty slides today. And today I'd like to talk about my volts model. As you know, I like to have fun with the names of my
Right.
models. This is a serious business, but why not have some fun with the names?
Sure.
This is the visualization of optimal limitless Tesla superchargers, the volts model. So it's interesting to note that volts comes from an Italian guy in the late 1700s. His name was Alessandro Volta, and he actually was the inventor of the electric battery.
I see. Okay.
So it's very fitting that I named my model after him. He lived, a pretty good life. Napoleon was his friend. Napoleon named him a count. And I believe he died at the age of 82, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a pretty good life. He also discovered methane.
Wow.
So, he was on sort of both sides of the energy spectrum. Um, but without further ado, here are the results from my volts model. Now, you'll have to listen to this whole show to get the numbers. But here are the results in terms of the potential business value of the supercharger network for Tesla. Now, I will give a little bit of the punchline here. Like anything that's Tesla related, utilization seems to be a key variable. And it is no different for the supercharger network than it is for the future robotaxi network and other things that we've discussed on the show. The utilization is critical. And so the value goes up materially as the utilization improves. And so with, again, today's announcement that Ford and GM and others are going to be using the supercharger network, that will only help utilization. It also means that Tesla has to continue to invest heavily in the supercharger network and expand it. So we'll get into the details here in a second. But these are the results from the model presented on the screen right now, without any numbers.
Got it. All right. Good.
Okay, let's move forward. So today, as it stands, there are 6,131 supercharging locations around the world. Supercharge.info is a really good site to look at this. And you can also see that there are 261 under construction worldwide, and there's another 491 in the permitting process. Now, these numbers are a little bit understated because whatever is happening in China, it's showing no permits in process in China. Now, you can bet that they're adding superchargers in China. They must have a different process. So those are not being tracked here. In North America, there is almost 2,500 supercharging locations in North America. Okay.
Yep.
Now, it wasn't that long ago that there weren't any superchargers. And I thought this was funny from Terrible Maps. You go all the way back to 1437 AD, and there were no superchargers around. Alessandro Volta had not yet invented the battery, so
Right.
there was no need for superchargers. But even going back to 2012, the
Yeah.
first Tesla superchargers appeared in North America. There were 6 installed in 2012, I believe. This map is showing 7. This is when supercharge.info started up. So this was, I think, their first map where they had 7 superchargers. This is where the definition of range anxiety came into the fore. If you were traveling from New York to Los Angeles, it would have been a bit of a challenge to drive your vehicle across the country.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so this isn't so long ago. This is 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, and fast forward to today, and this is how it looks. So that's pretty incredible progress in 12 years. And as we know now, they're building one in North America every hour.
Right. One, not one station, but one stall per hour.
One stall,
Probably
yes.
it would probably be a station about every other day, something like that.
Yes, that's right. And so it's really pretty phenomenal. Even in Canada, you could pretty much drive anywhere across the country, no problem, and be close enough to a supercharger that you could make that journey.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
as we know, this network will be filled out even more than it is today. They're continuing to expand this network very, very aggressively. Worldwide, this is the superchargers under construction or in the permitting process. And as I mentioned earlier, you don't see any in China
Right.
under construction or permitting. So there's an underreporting here of what's actually going on.
Right. And of course, what's interesting to me is to see the territories that we haven't even begun in. Mexico, Central America, all of South America, all of Africa, Russia. I mean, there's massive amounts of the globe that there's not even a beginning yet.
That's right. There is a supercharging station in Moscow. If I go back to this previous slide here, you can see one. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but there's one dot here in Russia.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And there might be some others here that might be in Russia as well. So there are, there's a couple. Now, in terms of density, Shanghai takes the reins there. They just opened on February 5th, the 200th supercharger station location in Shanghai.
Wow.
So it's the most densely populated supercharger area by stations in the world.
Wow.
So that's also important. Where there's high density of Teslas, you need a lot of stations as well. Let's just say range anxiety is not a problem in Shanghai. So if we look at stations versus stalls, how many stalls are there per station, or how many connections, how many plugs are there? We've been averaging just over 9 stalls per station now since about 2020.
Okay.
Now, there seems to be a trend a little bit towards larger stations with more stalls. And in fact, the largest supercharger station is being built right now in California, and it will have 164 charging stalls.
Is that Buttonwillow?
That is Kern County.
Okay.
I'm not sure if Buttonwillow is also the same name or not, but it's in Kern County, California.
Okay. I think it's
Apparently it's
along the
off
5 freeway, kind of the first stop out of Los Angeles up the 5, I think.
Yeah, it says I-5 near Lost Hills, if
Right.
that's helpful. Yeah. So it's also going to include solar canopies over above every parking stall. So we'll see how this trends over time, whether we get up to 9, 10, even larger stalls on average.
Right.
This is the number of superchargers that Tesla had at the end of the year, just under 55,000. And in fact, then on January 4th, Tesla announced that their 55,000 supercharger was up in operation. So just
Mhm.
4 days later after the end of the quarter. So again, a pretty phenomenal growth in the number of stalls
Right.
around the world. This is just another way of looking at it. This is the number of additions per quarter.
Mm.
So in the fourth quarter last year, Tesla installed almost 3,800 new supercharger stalls worldwide. Okay, so that is way more than one an hour. But
Yeah.
the announcement today was one per hour in North America.
Right.
Okay. Okay, so it raises the question about how many supercharger stalls do we need? Now, if we go back to gasoline-powered vehicles, one of our recent shows, we talked about how there's about 145,000 gas stations in North America or in the US. And those gas stations service about 275 million vehicles.
Okay.
Okay. And if the average gas station has between, let's say, 6 and 12 pumps,
Mhm.
then there might be, 900,000 to 1.8 million pumps, or 150 to 300 cars per pump.
Okay.
Okay. So hopefully everybody doesn't go to the gas station at once. If you do, there might be a line 150 cars deep,
Right.
right? That's why during, hurricanes, that's a problem. But if everybody's just fueling up normally, then it's not an issue. There's enough pumps for everybody and get their cars full. So the question is then for EVs, how many pumps do we need? How many connections or stalls do we need per EV? Now, I think we can we can look now at what it is on average. So for Tesla, the number of vehicles that have been delivered versus the number of supercharger stalls, that ratio is about 100 vehicles per stall.
Huh.
And it's been trending up a little bit over time. Okay. So again, remember for gasoline powered cars, it's 150 to 300 cars per pump.
Yep.
And for EVs for the US right now, it's about 100.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, this is Tesla worldwide,
Yes, sir.
100.
All right.
Now, we can take a look at Norway. They're a lot further advanced or along in their EV journey than we are. They actually build themselves as the EV capital of the world. This is from the Norwegian tourism site.
Mhm.
And I guess with roads like that, yeah, I'd like to drive an EV there too. That would be fun. But here's some numbers on the left side. They have about 700,000 EVs, and total charging stations is just over 11,000. So it's about 60 EVs per charging station in Norway. So Tesla's network is about 100. In Norway, it's about
Charging
60
per charging station or per pump? Or
pump.
per pump. Okay.
Yeah, per connection, per
Per
stall.
connection.
Yeah,
Stall. Yes, stall, I think is the, yeah.
yeah. And also just, you can see here the highlighted that last year, 82% of new cars sold in Norway were EVs.
Right.
So EV adoption is well on the way in Norway. So bringing that back, so that's we'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's look at some of the other sort of potential inputs into the model. This isn't necessarily so much in the model, but it's kind of interesting in terms of how much it costs Tesla to install, to make a supercharger and install it. It's different in different places, and they're comparing themselves versus the average competitor.
Right.
And so, Tesla's cost, let's say, is between 50,000 and maybe, $40,000 per supercharger.
Okay.
And the competition is much, much higher. So
Much higher.
Tesla definitely has a massive cost advantage in building out their network. Okay. Another thing that's interesting is the charging time has come down over time.
Mm-hmm.
And in my models, I use an average charging time of about 27 minutes, but I think that will continue to come down as we have more and more higher speed chargers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's another factor. And then there was some interesting information in last year's Investor Day that Tesla talked about, charging of its EVs. And this is kind of a summary of it from Inside EVs. But one interesting number was Tesla cars are driven on average 65 miles between charging sessions. So that tells you that a lot of people are just charging at home.
Of course, right.
Right.
Yep.
And so range anxiety for the average EV owner is not an issue at all. They're not driving anywhere near the range capacity of their vehicles. Okay. But we did learn a number of interesting things. And so in terms of the supercharging network, that right now, or this was as of the end of 2022, so it's a little bit dated now, it's more than a year old.
Mm-hmm.
Each stall was averaging about 35 sessions per week, or only 5 per day.
Wow.
So very, very low utilization. Now, that kind of makes sense because in order for Tesla to sell EVs, they have to have enough superchargers out there so that people feel like they can charge their car and not get stranded.
Of course.
And so over time, the utilization should increase, right? But right now, or a year ago, the utilization was very, very low. And then in terms of pricing, there isn't one set price for supercharging around the world. And even in a specific location, the pricing changes with the time of day. And so in the lower half of this image, you can see, based on the time of day, what the supercharging rates are in the Santa Monica location.
Which is probably one of the busiest anywhere.
Yeah. Now, it's my understanding that the average rate for supercharging right now is about 28 cents a kilowatt hour.
Mm-hmm.
So here in Santa Monica, in this image, it's a little bit higher than that. Okay.
Yep.
And then the other thing that we learned was a little bit about the business model. And again, this is a couple of years old now. But Ross Gerber asked Elon, sort of about what the business model looks like for supercharging. And Elon responded, we aim for 30% gross margins and about 10% profitability, all costs included. So that was another data point that was useful in terms of trying to model out what supercharging looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, so here's the model. And this is the model in all its gory detail. It's actually pretty simple. We factor in what the average charging time is. Let's call that 27 minutes.
Okay.
The maximum number of charges per day could be 53.
Okay.
Okay. But the charger utilization rate is only 10%, and that yields 5 uses per day, going back with that 2022 number that Tesla said on Investor Day last year.
Right.
Okay, so this is kind of where they were maybe a year ago. And if I assume that the cost per kilowatt hour is 25 cents, and the average vehicle battery size, let's say, is 25 kilowatt hours, and the percent of the battery charge is about 2/3, the average revenue per charge is about $12.50, and the supercharger is earning about $67 a day or $24,000 a year.
For each stall.
Each stall.
Right.
Yeah, this is each stall, each plug, each stall.
Right.
Okay. And I'm sticking with Elon's 30% gross margins. So that means that operating costs are 70%. So it costs $17,000 to run one of these things. And the gross profit then is 30%, just over $7,000 per supercharging stall.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm factoring in some operating expenses, SG&A 15%, and taxes gets you to a net income of just under $3,000 per stall. And that's close to Elon's 10% profitability number that he mentioned.
Okay.
Okay. So that's not too bad. And if we look at that in terms of for 50,000 stalls, which is kind of where we were, last year, at the end of the year, it's close to 55,000, but just using round numbers, 50,000, using those numbers and applying a PE ratio of 30 to it, gets you to a $4 billion valuation for Tesla's supercharger business last year.
Okay.
Okay. If Tesla 10x's the number of stalls over a period of time, then that you could get to a $41 billion valuation if there's 500,000 superchargers worldwide.
Right.
Okay. Now, that shouldn't be a stretch. That should be that they should be able to do way more than that. And we'll explore that in a second. But that also assumes that this model doesn't change. And so in a minute we'll explore some different ways
Right.
of looking at things in terms of utilization improving and that kind of thing. Okay. But supercharging, it's right now a nice little business and has some potential, and I'll show you what that potential looks like. Okay. And again, this is just the valuation of supercharging. It doesn't include anything else, any other part of Tesla's business.
Sure.
Okay. So what's changed? Well, the industry in North America pretty much across the board has adopted Tesla's charging standard as their own. And as we mentioned at the outset of the show, some companies now have access to the charging network. They'll have to use adapters for existing vehicles, but eventually all of their vehicles made in North America will come with the Tesla, North American charging standard as standard option.
Right.
And pretty much now every single major auto company is a part of it. Ford was first. 14 days later, GM followed suit. And then you can see for the rest of the industry how long it took them to join. Stellantis was the last major announcement, and that was 262 days from when Ford decided to do it. So it took them, maybe 3 board meetings to figure this out.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, they're all there, and between now and time in 2025, they're all going to phase this in.
Right.
Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means that the utilization of existing superchargers should go up. And it also means that Tesla probably needs to continue to invest heavily and build more.
Right.
Right, assuming an influx of vehicles over time, in addition to what Tesla is selling themselves. Okay. The other thing that's changed is announcements that Tesla is selling the supercharging hardware to other companies. Now, this doesn't necessarily impact my Volt's model, because I'm assuming that they sell this to BP and others. They make money on selling the equipment, but I'm not sure if they make money on the energy usage. Yeah, that might be BP supplying that and making any money on that. So this is not really part of my Volt's model.
Mm-hmm.
But it does show, what Tesla is trying to do in terms of, building out the infrastructure for themselves and others, helping the industry in general.
Mm-hmm.
This is a $100 million order. It's a pretty sizable order for superchargers. That was from BP. And then in November, mid-November, a company in Europe is essentially doing the same thing. They didn't disclose how much their order was, but this is a pretty decent sized charging company in Europe.
Right.
Okay. And then the other thing that happened was some hotels announced that they were going to install wall connectors. And again, this isn't the supercharging business. These are slower wall connectors. If you're staying overnight at a hotel, this is plenty. It'll charge your car while you're sleeping. So in September, that was Hilton, 20,000 wall connectors at 2,000 hotels. And then in December, Best Western, they're going to also install universal wall connectors across their hotels in North America. And then recently, on February 6th, Choice Hotels also going to do similar things. So the hotel industry is building out charging network as well, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Okay. All right. So back to our model. Let's now look at what happens when utilization goes up. So it's the third row, this charger utilization rate. And so the initial base assumption was 10%, and that's the 5 charges per day. Well, what happens if the utilization can increase to 12.5, 15, 17.5, 20, 25, and 30 over time? Right. And so what that means is the number of charges per day then goes up as well. So we're going from 5 a day, potentially up to 17 a day, which doesn't seem like a stretch.
Right.
Right. And the one thing I did change here too is I decreased the charging time to 25 minutes. So we've got a maximum number of charging sessions per day of 58.
Right.
Okay. Didn't change anything else in the model here, but I did say that over time, if the utilization goes up, it also follows that you get some economies of scale and perhaps your operating costs come down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I decreased operating costs from 70% down to 65. I actually think they could go even lower than that if the utilization was as high as 30, but I just kept it at 65.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I did keep the SG&A expenses level across the board, because because they are what they are. And if utilization goes up, that really doesn't change anything on the SG&A side.
Right.
So that actually goes down from 15% all the way down to under 5 with a higher utilization. And so what that does, it takes your net margin from 13% up to almost 23 at the highest utilization rate.
Right.
And the profit per charger from just under $3,000 potentially all the way up to 18,000. So you can see how sensitive the network is to utilization. If they can get these superchargers more highly utilized, then this is an extremely attractive and profitable business for Tesla. Now, it's balancing that. It's balancing maybe the profit goals versus just the goals of the network and having these things available for people so that wherever they drive, they can charge and not have to worry about being stuck somewhere.
Right.
Okay. Now, as there's more Cybertrucks out on the road, maybe that's not so much of an issue because if they could charge other vehicles, then you've got roving superchargers in that sense. So maybe over time, that'll solve itself. But this is an interesting model because it shows the potential profitability when this model is truly at scale.
Yes, and I think to a certain extent, what we already know in the United States is that you have the spacing is already good enough. Now it's just going to be a matter of putting more in the same spaces. I mean, it could be in the same spaces or just on the street, or you could still put them in between in order to give even less range anxiety. But basically, at this point, as you said, even in Canada, you're basically now not really suffering from range anxiety if you're in a Tesla. We know so many folks who've driven across country, multiple different directions at different times, and it's just not an issue. In fact, I don't know if you've ever run into this, we had a situation in San Diego a few weeks ago where we had gotten off the freeway, had a charging station within a mile, had decided, no, we were just going to continue to go because we still had, 10% or something, I forget how much to go. And the car wouldn't let us navigate out of that situation. It said, no, we're only going to show you the navigation to the charging station. We want you to charge up now. So with the computer basically helping, it's almost impossible to have a problem.
That's right. Yeah, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? There's no gasoline powered car that would do that.
No.
They would be happy just to let you run out of gas on the side of the road. And
it has happened to me. I can't begin to tell you how many times, but that's a personal problem.
Right, right. So for those that hate spreadsheets, here is the visual. Oops, here it is. Here's the visual of that last table, assuming a PE ratio of 30. So I just constant PE ratio across the board. You could imagine if the charging network was more profitable, more highly utilized, the PE actually that you might apply to it might be higher. But just using 30 across the board. The red is at 1 million superchargers worldwide. So at 10% utilization, 1 million superchargers is worth $82 billion.
I see.
If you go to 30% utilization on the far right, the red column, 1 million superchargers, is 539 billion of market value.
Wow.
Okay. Now, this begs the question of how many superchargers do we need in the world?
Right.
And so, let's work with the United States first. The United States is about 300 million vehicles. Let's say those all became EVs. And let's say that you needed only, that there's 100 EVs per plug. Then you need about 3 million potentially superchargers. Now, maybe you don't need them all to be superchargers, but 3 million, that's the blue line on this chart. So that's a business value between 250 billion to 1.6 trillion. Now, we shouldn't just look at the US. This is a global business. So getting 3 million superchargers globally doesn't seem like much of a stretch when there's 2 billion vehicles in the world.
Right.
Right. And as you pointed out, when we looked at the map, there's vast untouched parts of the world where they haven't even attempted yet to build out a network to even sell EVs. right? So this is a chart that's showing the potential business value from 1 million, 2 million, and 3 million. And then for those that want to look at even higher numbers, this is 4 million, 5 million, and 6 million.
Okay.
I'm not saying that I know how many superchargers there's going to be for Tesla in the world.
No, no.
I don't know. But certainly these numbers seem possible to me in the long run.
Yeah. And this raises my issue, and you might be an interesting person to ask the question. I've stated for a long time that some of these divisions need to be spun off. That there's no way that the market is ever going to give Tesla the full value for for the charging network, because your revenues are never going to be a high percent of, let's say, especially the robot business or the robotaxi business, but even the semi truck business could potentially be a $400 billion revenue business at some point. So I'm thinking there's the company, in the way that GE did, is maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but at some point, in order to give the full value to the stockholders, it's going to need to spin off some of these divisions.
I think that's highly likely in the long run. The other thing too, by the way, you just brought up semi. The mega charger is not part of this model.
Right. This is a
And
whole.
that too will be a very significant part of this business at some point.
Right, right. And the other part that's not mentioned too in this business is the ancillary businesses. So, you know, you mentioned Santa Monica, but we've got Hollywood right now putting up a very elaborate restaurant, some kind of eatery. I don't know if we could call it a full restaurant, but an eatery along with movies. I think the movies are going to be like shorts, like 20-minute movies on a loop or something. Anyway, it's going to be open fairly soon. I think later this year for sure, and it might be even first half. I know it's well along. All the walls are up. It's getting very, very close. But they've tried all kinds. They've got other kinds of things that they're trying worldwide, and you know, potentially a lot of these locations could have some kind of other business in the space that would generate revenues as well.
Yeah, I think there's that. There's a whole host of different things that you could do there that would be really interesting. The other thing I think that would make it fun for a lot of people is to have a little bit of a treasure hunt. Is in some way, if you could make each supercharging location something about it unique.
Yeah.
That kind of makes you want to go there and check it out.
Right.
Right. That might add an element of fun on a long road trip, is to, you know, stop at these different charging stations and, you know, participate in that. And certainly fun for kids. Almost like a supercharging passport that gets stamped along the way.
Exactly. Yeah. So you have those kinds of things. Then on the cost side, we are not necessarily looking at the potential, which could eventually be where all of this is solar driven, to where the real cost of the energy drops dramatically. And yet there wouldn't be any reason other than competition to drop the per kilowatt hour of fuel charge. Maybe there'll be some, you know, someplace in between where it is now, and you know, if you drop it enough, you may want to drop it to facilitate that. But again, this could drive it might lower the revenues, but increase the profit margins significantly.
Yeah, that's something I thought about, and right now the way I've treated it in the model is just that if the price per kilowatt hour drops, then the cost also drops.
Gotcha.
The operating costs, and so net the margin's the same. But you're right, it could actually be in Tesla's favor. The margins actually might increase. They might lower the price less than their cost is going down.
And then another thing that came to my mind is that different companies have done different things, but companies like Sears and JCPenney's and others ended up buying their locations. And right now, of course, I think all of these are rented locations. Some of them might be kind of sweetheart deals where the restaurant that is where the superchargers are in the parking lot of a restaurant is benefiting from the draw of pulling the cars into the restaurant. We don't know what these deals look like unless you know more than I do. But I'm guessing that the ones at Target and some of these other locations are probably paying rent. But these eventually they could be looking at owned locations, which would not only lower the cost of the ultimate cost of the overhead, but eventually could even be a growing asset.
That could be, yeah. I don't know the specific details behind any of those deals, but I would imagine there's a wide range of different things that they've explored. You know, Tesla might not want to be in the real estate business in that sense, but in some cases they may see an opportunity there to put a station somewhere and then sort of develop or have others develop the land around it and bring in services. That's kind of an interesting model as well.
It might also be fun, Cern. You might do some research and find out. I think at one point, and I'm not so sure if this is still true, I believe Radio Shack was the fastest expanding business in terms of locations ever. I don't know if Subway at some point might have topped them. I'm not sure, but it would seem to me that there's a real good chance that this is another record for Tesla in terms of opening locations of retail, of some kind of a retail business in, you know, how there's the speed of which they're doing this. So that might be an interesting thing to study.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I think that Starbucks is likely up there as well.
Yes, they might be. Yum Yum Donuts might have been there for a minute.
Yeah.
I think they lost. If they had the crown, they've lost it.
Right. Yeah. Amazing how things change.
It's true. It's true. All right. Well, this is extremely interesting. I think, you know, again, there's so many divisions of Tesla that are almost forgotten. We have the insurance division, which the potential for the profits in that division are absolutely astronomical. Although, in a sense, kind of like the stations that we just discussed, there is a potential for the revenues to eventually go down in the insurance business as well as the cars become, well, automated. You don't have anybody to sell insurance to, or at least not as much insurance. So there's, you know, there's all kinds of revenue patterns that are going to be very weird as the company grows into this disruption. I mean, the biggest one we've talked, I don't think you and I have talked about it, but the biggest one is what happens to the revenue picture for Tesla if half the cars are now owned, half of the new cars that are made are owned by Tesla for their robotaxi fleet. So all kinds of revenue weirdness that's going to be coming up in the years ahead.
Yeah, the insurance one is interesting because in an autonomous world, in theory, no vehicles should ever collide with each other. So the collision part of the insurance equation should go way down. Those costs should go way down. Now, I suppose you might also have this, it's still a risk of, you know, theft and damage to a vehicle. Some parts of the country, that's a bigger risk than others. And we see videos of people trying to break into a Cybertruck and then deciding that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be some element of insurance, but there's no doubt that autonomy disrupts insurance as we know it.
Right.
And in that case, I don't think too many would be mourning the loss of the insurance business. Right. You know, I'm sorry, Warren Buffett, but that might not be as profitable as it used to be. You know, and the revenue gained from autonomy would supersede that by an order of magnitude, I would think.
Yeah, yeah. But it is interesting. A lot of people, you know, people talk about the fact that Elon is a master of 4D chess. I've always claimed that I was a master of 1.5 D chess. I can sometimes see a move and a half ahead if I'm really in the mood to use as much of my brain as I can. But Elon seems to always be 4 moves out. I think in this case, it's really important to be thinking 4 moves out because these revenue models will dramatically change based on these disruptions.
They will. I would even go a step further and say that Elon's playing a different game. Everybody thinks they're playing chess and he's playing a different game.
Entirely different game. Yeah, it's pretty wild. Anything left on that story, Cern?
I think we covered that pretty well. It's you know, when you dig into it, supercharging is actually a very interesting business, and we're seeing rapid growth in that business worldwide. And we're seeing the issues that people talk about, range anxiety just dissipating away and not being an issue at all. We're seeing the success of countries like Norway and the EV adoption, and also it's a cold country, and so all these issues about EVs not working in cold climates, how that's just being debunked. There was a CNBC special that aired, I think, a couple of days ago. It's available on YouTube about EVs in Norway, and it was actually quite a good discussion. It's about a 30-minute long episode. And they brought with them some of their preconceived notions about EVs and cold weather and that kind of stuff. And the people that they interviewed did a nice job of debunking those issues.
Wow, excellent. What fun.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, Cern, I'm trying, is your, what do you call it? X handle just Cern Basher?
It is. I've made that as simple as possible, unlike Scott Walter, who has this Going Ballistic 5 handle. That doesn't make any sense to me, but yes, mine is much easier.
All right. And speaking of Scott Walter, 2 days ago, I did a video with Scott Walter on the bots that didn't get nearly as many views as it should have. If you haven't seen that video, you need to go back and check it out. And then there's then John, Dr. Know-It-All, and I did one yesterday. Between those two, we discussed a whole bunch of issues that nobody else has talked about yet. Things like how the bots will have a conversation with their human masters. Things like what's going to happen with AI in terms of subtle manipulation of the information. Anyway, I'm going to put the cards for both of those right here. Cern, that might be a conversation for another day too. I'm very, very interested in the future of the AI business as it impacts Tesla specifically, because obviously it's in the robots, it's in the cars. How will we potentially be subtly impacted by what the Tesla car tells us in terms of our next destination, or in terms of places to go and visit while we're in Milwaukee? I don't know. It's going to be an interesting life where we are talking to our robot like a friend and having him give us direction and advice.
Definitely. I can't wait to watch your episode with Dr. Know-It-All. But yeah, there's going to be some interesting conversations. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Cern, for being on with me. And to all of you out there, it has been great talking to you.
Thanks, Randy.